The first time I experienced sleep paralysis was 2 years ago. Before I had that awful and scary experience, I had heard people talk about their different sleep paralysis experiences, but I never thought it was as bad as they said until it happened to me. Before I share that experience that left me shaken for days, I'd love to say that I think sleep paralysis has something to do with the environment or the place we sleep. I'm saying this because in my whole 27 years of staying at my parents' house, I never experienced sleep paralysis, not even once. But on the very first night I moved into the new apartment I had rented, I had such a horrible experience that I don't think I can forget anytime soon. I had just moved out of my parents' house and rented a one-bedroom apartment. Even though my apartment wasn't very fancy, I was glad I could finally live independently and not depend on my parents anymore. I'll admit, I was very excited about my first night at my new apartment, and I thought my excitement would last until my most dreaded nightmare happened. That morning, I think it was around 3 a.m., when the atmosphere in the room suddenly felt different. I don't know how to explain it, but I know I was deeply asleep when I felt the energy change in the room. It was so evident and strong that no matter how hard I tried to ignore it and continue sleeping, I couldn't. At the same time I felt the energy change, my ears picked up some strange noise I hadn't heard before. For a moment, it sounded like my ears were buzzing, or something very close to my ears was buzzing. I couldn't say which one it was because I could barely differentiate where the sound was coming from. Unsure of what was going on, I opened my eyes to look around my room. Just as I was about to get out of bed, I realized that I couldn't move my body, not even a finger. My entire body was paralyzed. The worst part was that as I continued scattering my eyes around my room, I realized something was standing by my bedside. I could literally feel its dark and evil presence standing beside me. It was such a horrible experience for me because I was freaking out and trying to get my body off my bed at the same time. I had never felt so weak and vulnerable in my own body. Now, if my sleep paralysis experience was just the normal type of experience other people talk about, where they feel or see a presence in their room and then feel some sort of pressure on their chest, I'm not sure I'd be sharing mine. But my experience was different. So different that it scarred and scared me for weeks. What happened was that in the process of still struggling to move my body or get out of bed, I felt something grab my left arm so tightly, and the next thing I felt a sharp pain on that left arm. It was when my body felt that sharp pain that I finally managed to get out of bed and turn on the lights. I was so shaken that I could only think about how to get out of my apartment and drive to my parents' house, which was about 20 minutes from where I lived. As soon as I left my apartment and got into my car, I decided to look at my left arm, which the dark thing had grabbed. To my greatest horror, that arm had 4 long scratch marks. Whatever was in the room with me had scratched me so deeply that it caused the pain I felt. That experience alone terrified the hell out of me, but I'm glad my parents understood everything. If you're wondering if I continued to live in that apartment, the answer is no. No one in his or her sane mind would think of sleeping there for another night after what I experienced. Thankfully, I managed to get a refund on the apartment, and I'll confess, it took me a while before I got another apartment. Even after I moved back into my parents' house, I slept with the lights on for a very long time, until I finally got rid of the fear. That was my first and only sleep paralysis experience, and I hope I never experience it again. First, I'd like to begin by stating that this is not the usual sleep paralysis story. I say that because I wasn't the one who experienced the sleep paralysis, but I witnessed it as it happened to a friend of mine, Ben. Ben and I had known each other since our high school days. Though we weren't tight buddies in high school, we became close after college. After college, I returned to my hometown to settle down. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it was how things turned out for me. It was when I returned back to my hometown that Ben and I became close. On Friday nights, we would hang out and talk about life, women, and a couple of other things, the regular men talk. Even though Ben and I were close to a level, he never told me that he'd been experiencing sleep paralysis since he was 17. As of the time I returned from college to my hometown, Ben and I were both 25 years old, so that meant he'd been dealing with sleep paralysis for 8 years before I witnessed him struggle for his life that night. I know this is a bit personal, but I'll share it. 3 months after I moved back to my hometown to live with my parents, I got kicked out of the house because of some minor misunderstanding, and when this happened, I was forced to move in with Ben. Unlike me, Ben was an only child, and his parents treated him like a prince, so he barely had any issues with his parents. The first week I crashed at Ben's place, I didn't notice anything weird at all. All I knew was that Ben would stay up till 4 in the morning playing video games until he either got sleepy or tired of playing. I never suspected in any way that Ben was deliberately staying up so he wouldn't have to experience the horror he experienced almost every night. It wasn't until one Friday night. That Friday night, Ben and I went to hang out at our usual spot. We had both gone to work that day and returned around 9 p.m. Honestly, I was pretty tired, but Ben insisted we just go out and unwind from the day's stress. After drinking and chatting at the bar, we arrived home around 1 a.m. and went straight to bed because, we were exhausted. I remember that Ben was the first to sleep off because his loud snores made it difficult for me to sleep at first. I'd barely slept for long when I heard muffled sounds in the room. Initially, it sounded like I was dreaming, but I was forced to wake up when the sound didn't stop. Immediately, I opened my eyes. I saw Ben lying on his back in a way that seemed like he was being pressed down. His hands were in a very awkward and uncomfortable position, and his 2 eyes were open. Then it hit me. The muffled sound I heard was coming from Ben. It sounded like he was being choked. Without wasting time, I jumped up and grabbed Ben. It was such a horrifying sight to see, and at that moment, the only thing that came to my head was to grab and shake him. Thankfully, as soon as I lifted him from the bed, the paralysis left and he gasped loudly. He was so shaken, and he didn't know when he hugged me and began to cry. Jeez. Guys, I was dumbfounded. I'd never seen my friend so scared like that. In fact, seeing him like that, all paralyzed on bed, scared the shit out of me. That was the night that Ben opened up about his sleep paralysis experiences. He explained that it was the reason he always stayed up all night, even when he was tired. Unfortunately, when we returned from the bar that Saturday morning, he was tired and didn't even know when he slept off. After witnessing Ben go through that horror, as a concerned friend, I began to search online for ways to stop sleep paralysis, and I stumbled on lucid dreaming. I don't want to delve deep into that, but as of the time I share this story, Ben has mastered lucid dreaming and is no longer terrified of sleeping at night. I can't even imagine what it must have felt like for him to experience sleep paralysis every night for 8 years and not be able to sleep. But I'm glad we were able to find a way around it.